Both StrategicVoting.ca and VoteTogether.ca are running campaigns to try to coordinate the efforts of the so-called progressive voters to unseat the federal Conservatives in the October 19th election. Can strategic voting change the outcome of the election in ridings where the combined Liberal NDP Green vote outweighs support for the Conservative candidate, but none of the individual progressive candidates has sufficient support to come first in a four-way race? Let's look into that. Joining us now to help answer that question in Calgary, Alberta, Hisham Abdelrahman. He is creator of StrategicVoting.ca. And with us here in the studio, Amara Posian, campaign manager with VoteTogether.ca. And Jane Hilderman, who's executive director of Samara Canada. And it's great to have all you three on the program tonight. Hisham, let's just start with this very basic question, because I'm not assuming that everybody knows what strategic voting actually is. So what is it?
So strategic voting, in a very simple manner, in the election here in Canada, where we have first past the post system, and we have three different candidates running for the same seat, we'll find out that progressive split their votes between the two progressive candidates, like Liberals and NDP, and we end up with most voters actually voting progressively, but ending up with an MB that is conservative. I give a very good example on my website with Don Valley East in Ontario, where voters actually, 63% of the voters voted for a progressive candidate, Liberals, NDP and Green, and they ended up with actually with a conservative candidate, which won the 37% of the vote.
So the idea is for everybody to agree on
the vote.
The idea is to get everybody to agree on the one progressive candidate who could defeat the Conservative. Is that the idea?
Exactly, yeah.
Okay. You started this back in 2008. You tried to get people to start thinking about voting strategically in, I guess, in the previous two elections ago. What prompted you to get involved in this?
So in 2008, it was clear that it's going to be hard for a center-left government to be formed in the country because of the united right. We had, the right was united in 2003 under one banner, which is a conservative. And since then, it looks and still looks very hard for a divided left, center-left, to actually win an election, be it a majority or even a minority government. And the solution to this was actually there is few options for this. A consolidation on the left, the same way we saw it on the right. So a merger will happen, or voters actually abandon one of the progressive parties and go for only one, and which actually could end up with collapsing one of those parties and disappearing from the political stage. Or the third option, which is actually strategic voting, trying to get everybody to select the best possible candidate in every one of what I call it swing ridings, where actually combined progressive vote can win the day, and voting for this candidate to allow it to win. The problem of consolidation on the left, on one hand, or a collapse on one of those parties on the left on the other, will lead actually to two-party system. I don't think a lot of people would like to see a two-party system in this country. Would not be very good for the Canadian democracy at all.
All right, therefore strategic voting
at the time looks to be and still looks to be the best option we have.
Okay, let me go to, just before we talk to you about Vote Together, which is your effort, we got a video here, produced by Lead Now, which sort of says what you guys are all about, okay? Let's look at the monitors here in the studio. Let's roll it, please.
The last time I voted?
Last time I voted Liberal.
Last time I voted Liberal.
Last time I voted Green.
I voted Green.
I voted NDP. Last time I voted NDP.
In the last federal election, a majority of people voted for a change in government.
But our broken voting system gave the Harper Conservatives
100% of power with 39% of the vote.
On October 19th, thousands of Lead Now supporters will be voting together.
Voting together.
We'll be voting together for the best local candidates who can defeat the Harper Conservatives.
No matter where you live,
you can help stop the riding-by-riding vote splitting
that lets Harper win.
This time, I'm voting together.
I'm voting together.
This time, let's vote together.
You're voting together.
We're voting together.
What does that mean?
I can't not smile after watching that video. I've seen it so many times and I get so excited. So Vote Together is Lead Now's election campaign. It's a one-stop shop full of the information that you need to make a good decision on election day. The best local candidate who can defeat the Conservative. Where possible, we've provided local polling that has been funded by over 2,000 of Lead Now supporters from across the country. And not only are we providing good local information for people to select and support the best candidate who can win, we're giving people strategic ways to take action based on where they live.
How accurate is the polling? No, it's a problem, because obviously if you want people to vote for the candidate you think is best able to beat the Conservative, the polling had better be accurate or it's not going to help.
The amount of information that exists on the riding pages at VoteTogether.ca is unprecedented. So historically, with efforts, with strategic voting efforts, people have looked at national polls and regional projections to make assumptions about what's happening locally. And what we're trying to do in as many places as possible is crowdfund for local polling so that we can provide a good snapshot of what's happening in the riding.
Can you give us an indication in previous election campaigns of where Vote Together, as opposed to vote for the party that may be your first choice, actually worked?
Vote Together is different from previous efforts. So not only are we making recommendations in some places for the best candidate who can defeat the Conservative, those recommendations are backed up by local polling where possible and a strong ground game. So just this Saturday, we knocked on over 5,000 doors across the country. And we have a large number of people who are canvassing almost daily at this point, and we're channeling phone calls from across the country into Conservative swing ridings and donations from across the country into Conservative swing ridings. So not only are we providing all of this information on the riding pages at VoteTogether.ca, but we're also backing that up with volunteer power from across the country and really trying to get out the vote for candidates who can defeat Conservatives.
Jane, what is Samara's view of this kind of effort?
I think strategic voting has been always a part of our first past the post system. We have an electoral system that can incentivize voters to think about their second choice preference in order to cast a ballot. And that is, it's a challenge in the sense that even if you are prepared to vote for your second choice, you need to find yourself in a riding where that will matter. You need to try to coordinate that second choice among other voters who are prepared to change their vote and then all change in the same direction on the voting day. So it's actually a really complicated effort to try to coordinate. And I think that's why, even though it's always been a feature, it hasn't played a critical role in an election that you can point to.
Clearly complicated and therefore not worth the effort?
I think that in the sense of, certainly from Samara's perspective, in our democracies, what we want is more people participating in our election system. Only 61% of voters turned out last time. And of those 61, 39% voted for Conservatives, and they want a majority government. I'd rather see us grow the number of turnout in terms of adding greater legitimacy to our system than focus on, per se, a strategic effort to oust a leader. But strategic voting is something that generally appeals more to a very sophisticated, engaged voter, not necessarily brings new Canadians or new voters into the system.
Amara, I gather part of the difficulty with it as well is, let's say you're living in a riding where the Conservative, again, won on the splits, and you're a Liberal, but the New Democrat, you've seen in the polling, has the best shot to beat the Conservative. The trouble is, a lot of Liberals hate New Democrats more than they hate Conservatives. What's the advice to them?
I mean, I think what we're seeing is that the vast majority of people want change on October 19th. And yes, strategic voting can be complicated, but it's never been this simple. So we're putting good local information on riding pages, historic results, local polling, information that has never existed in one place, so that people can make up their own minds.
No, I get all that. I get all that, but what if you're a Liberal and you hate New Democrats more than you hate Conservatives? You can't bring yourself to vote for the NDP even if they've got the better shot to defeat the Conservative. What do you do then?
We're finding that we're engaging a lot of people who've never been involved in politics before, people who are disillusioned with all of the political parties because they see that they can't work together for progress on the issues that the Lead Now community cares about. And those are the people that we're talking to. In the last election, there were 6,000 votes that stood between a minority and a majority government in just 14 places. So what we're doing is trying to find the right people in the right places and talking to them. we're going to be in our 11 target ridings where we have people canvassing nightly and we're channeling phone calls and donations from across the country into those places. We're having tons of conversations with voters. It isn't just a matter of putting a recommendation up on a website and hoping that people make a strategic decision. We're actually engaging people through one-on-one, face-to-face conversations at the door and at the phone, and we're finding that people are really excited about the campaign.
Well, let's do one example here. There is, let's go to Winnipeg. The Elmwood-Transcona riding in Winnipeg is a riding, Hisham, in your efforts here, you're asking people to vote NDP if they want to get rid of the Conservative. You're even asking Liberals to vote NDP and Greens to vote NDP. And here's what the Liberal had to say about this effort. Here's the quote from the CBCnews.ca website. Andrea Richardson-Lipon, who is the candidate, says, "For my fellow Canadians who are being told how to vote, this may disillusion the political process. It may prevent other people from taking the leap into politics who are in it for the right reasons. And to what end? I will always fight for my constituents and put their interests first. And if that isn't strategic, then I don't know what is." Okay, so Hisham, tell us, what kind of reaction are you getting from the parties who may not be the parties that you're telling people to vote for strategically?
So there is actually two things I would like to say here. First is that we had survey after survey showing that 50% of progressive voters actually are willing to switch their first choice to the second choice if it will make a difference. That's around 4 million voters in Canada if you use the 2011 election. So those are pretty much that our target audience, those 4 million people who are willing to switch their vote. So we are trying to reach those and tell them this is what we are trying to do. The second is that we are not trying to say that we are going to be doing strategic voting forever. We are trying to bring a better system that will represent Canadians and representing more voices into the process and bring more people into the democratic process by showing them that every single vote will count. So we are trying to change first past the post to something that actually might work better for people. So yes, there is absolutely, for every single riding, we are recommending on the website one candidate, and there is always the supporter of the other two candidates that they don't like it, which is understandable. But for the majority of voters, for every progressive voter out there, the regular person, it is actually for them, it is more important to make a difference, to bring the change that we need to bring this time, than to vote for a specific or your first choice.
Okay, I hear you on that, but Jane, I'm going to come to you with a follow-up, and that is, again, with this previous example. If you're a Liberal and you can't abide the notion of making Tom Mulcair the Prime Minister of the country, even if it does get rid of Stephen Harper, how are you supposed to handle this whole strategic voting thing?
Well, it's actually a challenge with strategic voting in that it often works best when you have a third party whom those supporters of the third party realize that they don't have a viable chance to win and are more willing to not let their vote go to waste, so to speak. The challenge right now is, up until perhaps the last few days of the campaign, if our national polling numbers are showing accurately, we actually had a campaign that was competitive 3 ways. And so that third party, normally the NDP in our system, has actually entered the campaign as the official opposition. So a lot of, I think, NDP supporters who have in the past been the ones most prone to engage in strategic voting, see this perhaps as a historic opportunity for them to have an NDP government. So they are probably going to be less interested in changing their vote.
Let me also get you to comment on this aspect of the story, which is, we know from studies, we know that people vote mostly because of what's going on in here. They vote at the end of the day because of something their heart tells them or their gut tells them. It's an emotional as opposed to an intellectual decision. This very much requires an intellectual decision, right? So, I don't want to say doomed, that's too strong, but is strategic voting in trouble for that very reason?
I think it will appeal, as said, to a sort of group of voters, and the trick is to find them, and that's exactly what Lead Now is working very hard to do. But for many other, for I think many voters, as you say, it's a complex mix of weighing policy ideas that are on the platform agenda along with sort of the emotional appeal of the different leaders and candidates running in your riding.
I think it's also an emotional response to a broken democracy. I don't think strategic voting is just voting with your head. What we're trying to do with Vote Together is connect this emotional response to a broken democracy with information at a riding level that will help you decide. And in some places it is the NDP that's a strategic vote. In some places it's the Liberals. We need a riding by riding approach. But we're trying to connect the emotional response with good information and tools to make a difference. So I don't think that it's just an intellectual decision. I think people are frustrated with our broken democracy. I think people want change, and I think that this is a vehicle through which they can achieve change on October 19th.
Okay, we'll talk about more overarching change in just a second, but Sheldon, let's put this graphic up here. I'm on number 5 here. Hisham, you built this graphic for your site, which shows the Conservatives, if you look at the bottom right-hand bar there, getting only 68 seats as a result of strategic voting, compared to the 123 seats that, once again, polls are notoriously difficult to extrapolate into seat counts, but if the current polling, or when you did this polling as of October 1st, if it extrapolated into seats, it would be 123, whereas strategic voting could knock the Conservatives down a peg to 68. Again, sort of take us through this and tell us how you came to that conclusion.
So it is like what is the graph shows actually is a best case scenario. So for this to happen, we want everyone interested in strategic voting to vote strategically in all 130 swing ridings, and we want them all to vote for one candidate in every one of those ridings. So from theoretically it is possible, but in reality actually is very hard to accomplish. But the point of the graph is this is how strategic voting actually can affect the result of an election. So I actually did calculation, a little bit of probability, and did a little bit of calculation. And for a realistic number to come up with, if the website StrategicVoting.ca had a good campaign, I think we can easily reach around between 90 and 105 seats for the Conservative, which is a great win, and that's all we need to bring in one of the progressive parties ahead, and for them to form a minority government.
Okay, tell me this, Hisham. Tell me this. How many people would have to vote strategically in order to hold the Conservatives to the lower number in that several dozen ridings that you just pointed out?
So I would think that we at least need to reach around 2 million people to be actually to bring us to the 90 number. I think with 1 million we actually can still win with around 105 for the Conservative, which is going to bring one of the other progressive parties, Liberals or NDP, ahead, and they can form a minority government. Again, we are not trying to do, for all progressives out there, we are not trying to actually saying that strategic voting is the way forever. We are saying that we are hearing from Ms. May and we're hearing from Mr. Mulcair and Mr. Trudeau that they don't, as us, they don't like the system, first past the post, and they want to change it to some more representative system. And if we get to this more representative system, there is no need for strategic voting anymore. So it is one-time thing that we need to do this if our leaders, progressive leaders, actually will will actually do what they promised us to do.
Okay, Amara, help me out with this. I think in your effort, you've identified 72 ridings where strategic voting could change the outcome from last time. I think Hisham's site claims there are 130 ridings, which is, it's more than a third of the ridings in the country. How do you decide if a riding is a ripe target for strategic voting?
So we took a look at historic results and identified swing ridings as ridings where the result was previously close and the outcome could be different this time. And for the purposes of our campaign, we focused on conservative swing ridings. So we took ridings where the Conservatives won by less than 15%, or one of the opposition parties won by less than 5%, and the Conservatives came in second. These are places where, with our 460,000 person community at Lead Now, we thought that we would be able to effectively channel resources from across the country into a few targets where we could actually make a difference. So that's how we picked our 72. And VoteTogether.ca is structured around providing good local info everywhere and helping people across the country take action in those target ridings.
When you say to people, you mentioned that you had thousands of people out knocking on doors.
Yeah.
When you go to, let's say, a Liberal home You've knocked on the door, there's a Liberal sign on the front lawn,
Yeah.
and you say to the people at the front door, you do know the Liberal has no hope of winning in this riding, right? Whereas the New Democrat, based on polling and based on what happened last time, has a much better shot at defeating the Conservative. When you make that pitch, what do you hear back?
Well, that isn't usually how we make the pitch.
Okay.
Usually we start by asking if people want change on October 19th. And as you've seen in the polls, the vast majority of people do. What people don't usually realize is that in a handful of ridings across the country, the majority of people can vote for change but still elect a Conservative. And when we have that conversation and offer an alternative, and we aren't making blanket recommendations in ridings. Right now we're signing people up to the campaign so that we can engage them in choosing a candidate together.
Okay, you all understand that my job here is to poke holes in this thing. So let me try one more time on a different angle. Hisham, earlier in the campaign, the numbers said one thing. We are now today in a campaign where the public opinion surveys are saying something else. And as a result, in your efforts to get people to vote strategically on who's got the best shot to beat the Conservative, you are probably going to be, you have already, and in the days ahead may be changing again, the recommendation you are making to people as to whether the Liberal, New Democrat, or Green has the best shot at knocking off the Conservative. So again, does this not get a little too complicated for the average Canadian to follow?
So this is actually important because this was a decision at the beginning of the campaign to, should I actually put a recommendation from the first day or should I actually wait to later on the campaign? And my decision was actually to put a recommendation at the beginning, knowing very well that some of those recommendations will change. And the idea is that I really want to do two things. I want people actually to get involved in the process. I want them to get engaged. I want them to visit the website. I want them to think about the proposed recommended candidate for the riding, and I want them to start contemplating voting for this candidate, contemplating voting for somebody who might not be their first choice. So this is a process. I think it will take some time for all voters to reach the conclusion that yes, they might have to vote for somebody who's not their first choice. So the one thing I also did, I made it clear on the website and also on my posting on Facebook and Twitter that we will make changes, and I already did some changes already, changed some of the recommendation because of the changing, as you said, this is kind of like we are seeing a roller coaster of poll results in this election as we never saw before, kind of like more or less, and recommendation change is going to happen, and I want to be able to get into accepting this accepting the recommendation change if it happens. So it's kind of like more of engaging progressive voters who are willing to vote strategically and getting them to accept their second choice, that they might have to vote for their second choice, not their first choice.
Okay, let me get Jane on this. Jane, how problematic do you think it is earlier in the campaign to say, here's our recommendation if you want to vote strategically and get rid of the Conservative, and then a week or two later saying, wait a minute, we didn't mean that. Now we think this is the better candidate. How problematic is that for the voter who's trying to sort of keep up with it all?
Well, I think it goes back to a point you raised earlier in this segment around polling and the challenges with it in terms of we've had a very, very long campaign, 11 weeks. Public opinion can shift during that time, and even then, a poll is only ever a snapshot in time.
Of what people were thinking yesterday.
Exactly.
Not necessarily tomorrow.
Exactly. And there's a lot of challenges right now around different polling methodologies in terms of no single method is guaranteed to give you the most accurate representative
nothing
sample.
is ever going to predict the future. Right?
Right.
Like that's impossible and risky and dangerous.
Exactly, but it means that really the best call can be made only in the period immediately before October 19th in terms of what is happening on the ground. This period in between is actually just sort of creating some of that confusion around, who has wind in their sails or not at this point. So it'll be, I think, important if you are trying to engage in strategic voting to be looking for data that's current as of October 19th and trying to dig as much as possible underneath the hood to understand if it's what its limitations are.
Yeah, and data over time. I mean, I think one of the things I like about Vote Together is that we're showing 2006, 8, and 11 results transposed onto the new boundaries, and as many local polls as possible. So the idea is to give people as much local info as possible so that they can see trends over time and make an informed decision.
The thing that always, and listen, I don't know about polling any more than anybody else does, but you know, if they survey 1,500 people across the country to do a poll, let's say, that's, I mean, it's 5 people in each riding, right? On average, something like that. So if one of the 5 people changes their mind in a riding of 125,000 people,
yeah.
So how accurate can any of this polling be?
We're crowdfunding for local polling.
Okay.
So we aren't listing national polls, original projections on VoteTogether.ca. We're providing as many local polls as possible, and in our target ridings, multiple local polls so people can see trends over time. We aren't trying to predict the future. We're trying to give people as much information as possible so that they can decide. And there are a lot of people who want change, and it's a good resource.
Okay, let's bring up this pie chart. Should we do this, graphic number 3? Or are we doing 2 or 3? Okay, here we go. This is in the Greater Toronto Area, obviously, and then some of southwestern Ontario, including Kitchener, Ontario there. And the swing ridings are in the maroon, the possible swing ridings in the brighter sort of orangey red. And Amara, I mean, I gather from this map, you think a lot of these ridings are in play. How come?
Well, in a lot of them, they're places where either the Conservatives won by a small margin or another party won and the Conservatives came in second. So we've identified them on our website as places where people who do want to vote for change should take a look at trends over time and local polling in order to inform their decision. And here comes, are we going to see the pie chart as well? Here comes the pie chart. Okay, and it says the Harper Conservatives could win in your new riding if the vote splits between the Liberals, NDP, and Greens. And there's a couple of different examples, but as it says on the bottom, if we vote together, we can elect a strong candidate who can move Canada forward. And you've got the combined quote-unquote progressive vote at nearly 60% in this riding last time versus the nearly 41% of the Conservatives in this case. Does this pitch work? It does. It works so well. I was skeptical of pie charts, but people love pie charts. That's from Kitchener Centre. It's on a flyer that we've been using. Kitchener Centre, is that Peter Braid? Stephen Woodworth. Oh, Stephen Woodworth? Okay. Mm-hmm. Yep. Who wins, you know, narrowly, but who wins when the progressive vote is split? Yep. Okay. So we show people that the vast majority of people in their riding voted for change last time. The Conservatives snuck in a victory, and we explain that if people vote together, they'll be able to defeat the Conservatives. We actually have almost 2,000 vote pledges in Kitchener, and we'll be engaging people in a recommendation process, and if it is in fact a 3-way race, as it's looking like it will be, saying these 2 candidates have a shot at defeating the Conservatives, do you want to recommend one of them to your neighbors? And if they say yes, we'll help get out the vote for that candidate. Hisham, I gather we're going to lose our satellite to Calgary in just a couple of minutes, so let me get one more question in to you before that happens. If you had $100 million, I would say absolutely go crazy, go to 338 ridings across the country and, you know, barnstorm and do your thing. But you don't have $100 million. I'm imagining that you've got fairly tight resources. So I wonder whether or not you are spreading your effort too thinly by targeting 130 ridings, which is more than 1/3 of the ridings in the whole country. What do you say to that?
So, like, I'm using social media and the website pretty much is the only way I'm reaching voters, and it is kind of like the internet is a great equalizer, pretty much can reach everybody who's interested in the process. And because I did not collect any donations, so I'm not going to be spending any money on any ads, so I really don't need to concentrate. If I can concentrate, I absolutely will be concentrating on around 40 of those ridings for sure that I calculated. But in the meantime, if I'm using basically the internet and social media, I try to pretty much throw a wide net and trying to catch as much as I can. And again, I'm reaching lots of people. I'm actually very surprised with the reaction, with $0 spent on ads, with $0 spent on reaching people. The website so far have received almost 350 unique visitors according to Google Analytics, which actually made around 800,000 page views, which is great, to be honest, with the effort that I'm trying to do and no advertising. And 50% of those voters actually did check our swing district page, which tell me that they are actually interested in what we have to say about strategic voting and what might be as a recommendation in the riding. So in any case, if we can reach, again, we still have 2 weeks, for the election, before the election, and if we can reach around, again, 1 million, 2 million people with this message, that would be great success, and we actually can make a difference.
Your website is called, I should say, because we're about to lose our line, and I don't want to have that happen before I get a chance to thank you. So StrategicVoting.ca is your website. You are the creator. Hisham, we thank you for joining us tonight on TVO.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Thanks.
And in our remaining few minutes here, Amara, let me ask the converse question to you. I asked Hisham whether or not his efforts were spread too widely because he's targeting so many ridings. How many ridings are you targeting with your effort?
So we've identified 72 conservative swing ridings where Voting Together could make a difference, and we have 11 places where we have active field teams that are canvassing almost nightly now.
Okay, 11.
11.
Is that too few to make a difference?
In the last election, there was 6,000 votes over 14 ridings. So what we're trying to do is really make a difference in these places where we do recommend candidates, where the Lead Now community chooses to recommend a candidate. We'll be canvassing and flyering and making phone calls and really getting out the vote for the candidate who can defeat the Conservative.
Your site is called VoteTogether.ca, and here's something that you posted on the 2nd of October on that site. You say 75,679 people have pledged to select and support the best local candidates to defeat the Harper Conservatives and move Canada forward. Okay, that's what you've identified. How many of those people do you genuinely think are going to actually go out to the polls on the 19th and do the strategic voting thing?
So that number is now 77,000.
You're up to 77,000 now,
and
okay.
50,000 of those are in our conservative swing ridings. Again, you're asking me to predict the future. I have no idea. What I do know, though, is that between our sophisticated data on the website and our sophisticated field effort, I really do think that we can make a difference in places where we're running ground game and getting out the vote for a candidate. And we're measuring that closely. It's the first time anyone has done something like this before. So I'm spending the entire month of November evaluating the campaign, and I'm really looking forward to figuring out whether this did work, because it isn't just information on a website. We're backing it up with thousands of volunteers across the country who are getting out the vote for candidates who can defeat Conservatives. Let
me do a bit of a freelancing question here in the last minute to you, Jane, and that is, this is all well and good, and people who want civic engagement, bravo. Is the bigger solution here to get the Liberals, New Democrats, and Greens somehow agreeing either on a non-aggression pact or a formal party merger or something bigger, in your view?
Certainly, parties have a very unique place in our election, and given their ground game, so to speak, it's much larger than any campaign that can be citizen-led at this stage. And if they wanted to actually come up with a chance to change government, that would be probably a more surefire way to do so. That said, I mean, going back to the original point, how strategic voting works, it's really focused in this case around voting out a government, not necessarily voting in a set of ideas, which is exactly what all the party leaders right now are campaigning on. And I think that they would suggest that their visions for the country are a little different and would want voters to be weighing each of those in due course, along with those sort of emotional things that we all know people also care about. So that's going to be, I think, what will really shape this election, and that is democracy at work.
Jane Hilderman, Executive Director of Samara Canada, and Amara Posian, Campaign Manager, VoteTogether.ca. Good of both of you to come into TVO tonight and help us out with this. Thanks so much.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit supporttvo.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.